So my first question as a good journalist is say and spell your name, please.
My name is Sally, S-A-L-L-Y, Overton, O-V-E-R-T-O-N, Donlon, D-O-N-L-O-N, but I go by Sally O. Donlon.
Thank you very much for that. Sally, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lafayette.
In Lafayette?
Down where the fountain is, and the Lafayette sign in Parc Sans-Souci.
Where you live downtown?
Mm-hmm. There were houses there in those days.
Where that park was?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's right. Not many. There were a few houses. There was a Black Baptist church. It was a nice little neighborhood.
So it's changed quite a bit since you grew up there.
Oh, it certainly has.
Yeah.
Yeah, where the Children's Museum and the Science Museum are now was Hyman's department store and Hyman's food store.
Okay.
It was a bustling little small town, downtown area.
What was it like growing up in that small town?
It was great. It was great. Where this building is now was something called the SP lot. And for years I wondered who Mr. SP was. But it stood for the Southern Pacific lot. Because the railroad was right here, there weren't any buildings except for the depot. And this is where we'd play pickup ball on this very site.
Very nice. When was the area constantly in a state of change, or did you notice it start to change dramatically at some point?
It was, well, when I was growing up, I think there were like 35,000 people in the city of Lafayette. We weren't even really a city there. We were an incorporated area. And it was very small, very, very small. Everybody knew each other. My father hung out downtown on Jefferson Street outside of Antlers. He had his downtown cronies. But it began changing, I guess, when I was in high school. They built Como High School and started developing more out on that side of town.
Were the changes good at first, or were they off-putting?
Well, a lot of them I didn't really experience because I was kind of down here, down in the downtown area, and so much of the development was focused on the south side of Lafayette. So it didn't really impact us a whole lot in downtown Lafayette for a good while. And then when it did we did start noticing it, I would say that it was sort of negative because it pulled a lot of the tax dollars, the development dollars away from the downtown area and the original part of downtown, which was Sterling Grove, the original residential part of town, Sterling Grove, Nickerson Addition, Mouton Addition, all of those areas when the development moved to the south side. And you started noticing the stores, the stores were coming up empty, they were closing. There wasn't as much commerce going on in the downtown area. And how can I say that? The diversity remained down here. It was all kinds of folks still shopping at Hyman's, the two Hyman's, but a lot of the commerce was moving out to the south side.
And was that pre the oil bust in the 80s?
Oh yeah, I'm talking about the 70s.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, when I was in high school.
Okay. Now I know the answer to this next question. You did go to college. How much college exactly did you go to?
Oh, good Lord. I'm kind of a victim of lifelong learning. My daughter says I'm a nerd. I have an undergraduate degree. I have a master's degree in urban studies and public policy. I have ABD, which means all but dissertation, in cognitive science, and my concentration area was cognitive linguistics. And I am now working on finishing a PhD in English.
Okay, so
I'm highly overeducated, right, for my position in life.
Did you go to school outside of Lafayette or outside of Louisiana?
For my undergraduate degree, I went to school all over. I traveled quite a bit when I was very young within the United States. And I would go to school, I would take classes wherever I was. So in fact, my undergraduate degree is in general studies because when I went back to finally to finish up my undergraduate degree, they put all my credits together. It was like, ooh, look, you could finish right now if you take a degree in general studies. And I said, okay, hand it to me. And so that's what I did. But it was because I had taken all these disparate courses all over the country.
Did you have a favorite spot that you traveled to?
Well, I have family up in New Jersey, North Jersey, and so I lived up in North Jersey, and I lived in New York State. I really liked that a lot. And then I have family in Southern California. So I lived in Southern California, spent a little bit of time in Northern California. Just, you know, I kind of like the coasts.
Did you always know you were coming back to Lafayette?
Well, you know, I didn't think so, because it was, when I was very young, I just wanted to get away. You know, it's your hometown, right? You want to get out. You want to see other things. But then I spent 18 years in New Orleans, and I got my master's degree there. I worked downtown in New Orleans, mostly in the advertising and marketing industries. I went to school at night.
And then what made the decision to come back home?
We came back home. I was still married at the time. We came back home when my daughter was 6 years old, because it was just my husband and my daughter and myself, and we had no support group for my child. And we wanted her to grow up with the grandmas and the cousins and come back home to do that. And that's what we did.
Very nice. How long have you been with the university?
Well, this time I came back to the university. I've been with them last January 2017, made 4 years. Before that, I had worked for the Board of Regents for 4 years on a major grant. And then before that, I had worked on another grant through the Board of Regents, but they had me housed at the university. So I've been with the university or the Board of Regents. I've worked in higher education for, I think, 17 years. In the middle of that, I took a kind of a hiatus. I was headhunted away to work in a startup educational technology company. It wasn't really a startup, but it had only been around for a few years. So I worked there for 2 years. It was a company that dealt with neuroscience research to help students overcome difficulties in reading, those students who had oral processing issues. It was a great job. I really enjoyed it. I got to travel a whole lot and do a lot of research. But because it was a new company, they started having some financial problems, and I was one of those last hired, first fired kind of situations. So they let me go, and that's when I went back to work for the Board of Regents.
Okay.
So I've been in education for quite a while, since leaving. After I left the advertising industry, I worked for the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. I also worked for the Louisiana Bar Foundation. And in between, my ex-husband and I owned the only union print shop in New Orleans. So that was interesting too. But while we were doing that, we got a chance to help several people self-publish their publications, which that was fun.
That sounds fun. When did you know that that education was going to be such a passion for you?
Well, you know, when I was working for the Board of Regents, I went to school. I'm sorry. When I was working in advertising, is when I went to school at night to get my master's degree, and I had started to take a degree in an MSJ, which is a Master's of Science in Journalism. LSU was bringing faculty down to UNO for a particular journalism program. So business people down in New Orleans could go to school at night and earn this MSJ. And I started in that program. But I ended up taking a class as part of the curriculum in urban poverty. And it was out of the urban studies program, and I liked that a lot. So I switched my major. Started getting more involved in activism because of this exposure I'd had to urban poverty and public policy issues. And I started doing work on the side for the Center for Nonprofit Resources, which was run by the United Way in New Orleans. Doing that, I started working with a lot of foundations. I worked with community development corporations, and we were being trained in evaluation, program evaluation, because a lot of folks weren't doing that in those days. It was kind of a new thing after the GIPRA Act, which I believe was passed in 1984, right? So when the Board of Regents was working on a major grant, they were looking for educational evaluators. There weren't a lot of evaluators around, educational or otherwise, but there were a few folks who had worked with these United Way groups who had been trained in evaluation. So I applied for the position. And that's how I got back to Lafayette. My work was then in educational evaluation. The more you get into a subject, if it captures you, it captures you. And so that's when I became very interested in educational reform, and then from there into higher education.
Wow, that's great. It's good that you're doing that.
So I came to it from the quantitative analysis perspective and kind of moved around into the qualitative.
I love that. Did you have any mentors growing up?
Oh, I did. I had a family member. Well, my mother was a mentor. She was very independent and self-sufficient and resourceful, not very well educated. In fact, I had dropped out of high school and ran away to San Francisco. When I came back, my mother and I went and took our GEDs together. But she raised a house full of kids, and she was quite something. And then I had another family member, my aunt, my father's sister-in-law, was named Genevieve Carter, and she was very interesting too. Her first job out of her PhD program was as a camp counselor at Manzanar, Japanese internment camp in Northern California. So that was her first job. I think her second job was as a 90-day wonder under the Marshall Plan, where, these people, this is great, the Marshall Plan, where the United States gave grants to redeveloping European nations following the Second World War. Well, in order to apply for the money, you had to write a grant. They were actual grants. And these countries didn't understand how to write the grant process, so the federal government would team up 2 people for each country, and they'd send this team to the country that was applying for the grant to help them write the grant. They stayed there 90 days, and they called these teams 90-day wonders. And at the end of the 90 days, they turn in the grant to the Marshall Program, and a lot of times they were given money to rebuild, and she was one of those people. And then where she ended up was as one of the founding people. Before we had the Department of Education on the federal level, we had HEW. I don't know if you remember that. Health, Education, and Welfare. They were all together in different divisions, and she was one of the founding people in education. Wow. So yes, she was a really good mentor for me.
That's inspiring.
Mm-hmm,
yeah, that's
very inspiring. Wrote several books on volunteerism.
Wow, that's awesome. How did you skipped very quickly over running away to San Francisco? What was that?
It's a long time ago.
What was that experience like?
It was great. It was great. I told my mom that I was leaving a few times, and she kept telling my father. So finally, the last time when I did leave, I didn't tell her. So I let my clothes down in a sail bag out the bedroom window to a friend who was waiting below. He took them, and then we drove up the coast. I was living in Southern California at the time. I forgot to mention that. We went to high school in Southern California for a couple of years.
Okay, so not quite the culture shock that one might imagine from...
Well, I mean, I was living in Southern California, and this was 1970? Yeah, I was 16, so it was 1970. Southern California, Orange County in 1970 was Reagan territory. So yes, it was somewhat of a culture shock going from there to the Haight, yeah.
For sure. When did your family move from here to Southern California?
We went there, we lived there on 2 separate occasions. My father had emphysema. And so we would pull everybody out of school and go to Southern California for a year. Then my dad would get homesick, and we'd all come back home. So
all right. I'm going to move into some questions about AOC.
Okay.
Tell me how you first got involved with AOC.
How did I get involved with AOC? I'm trying to remember. Well, AOC and Ed has always been so supportive of community events, right? And I don't know if this is accurate about how I first got involved with them, but most of my involvement with AOC has been you guys helping us to record and distribute information on activities that are going on in the community.
Through League of Women Voters?
Through either League of Women Voters or through the university or other groups that I'm involved with. It's just, we did something at the university. We did a forum at the university that was in partnership with One Acadiana, a political forum, and you guys helped us with that as well.
Well, and we think you helped us by getting that event together. So yeah, it's a mutually beneficial relationship. What was your first impression of AOC?
Well, I thought it was a fabulous concept. Just as I'm a big fan of self-publishing, right? I said that we had done some self-publishing, help people publish their own books and such, and the internet. I think it's just tremendous when you can put the means of production, of distribution into the hands of people. Owning a printing press was a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the net neutrality issue that's so
Oh, absolutely.
big right now?
Yeah, I think the net needs to remain free, right? Look, there's problems with it, and we get problems, right? But on total, you got to keep it free. You got to keep the voice of the people. And in the urban studies class I teach, we talk about public spaces and the commons, right? And how it started with an area that was owned by everyone, that everyone could share their thoughts and ideas and share commerce, or real commerce or commerce of ideas. And that's evolved into things like the internet and groups like AOC, right? It's important that people have access to that distribution of information.
That town square.
Yeah. The town square, whether it's real and literal, or whether it's virtual.
I love it. What surprised you most about working with AOC?
How easy it was. How easy it was.
I love it.
It's a technical field, right? Video production is a technical field, and I work with computers all day long, but there's still kind of an intimidation factor for me. And for people who don't work with computers, I imagine there's a real intimidation factor. And so there's a possibility that the technology would be off-putting to a lot of people who have information that they want to share. But AOC, you guys at AOC just make it so easy.
Well, we love doing that.
It's seamless.
It's fun. What would be your dream project to work on or produce at AOC?
Okay, well, a dream project for me would be to, and one day perhaps I'll have time to do it, I would like to do a series of visual storytelling events, okay, where people tell their stories, like you're doing here, but stories, more in-depth stories that they come up with, like kind of oral histories, but oral histories that you could do visually.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's make it happen. What are you looking forward to in the rest of 2017?
Oh gosh. Oh gosh, staying out of war with North Korea. The rest of 2017, I'm really looking forward to increased activism on the part of people to stand up for things that are right. I'd like to see our local city council and population get behind the removal of these, relocation, I should say, of these monuments to Jim Crow that are such an intimidation to half of our population. I'd like to see people come to think differently in our community about those, how our neighbors are affected by things like that, by symbols like that. I broke my kneecap earlier in 2017, so I'm looking forward to continuing my recovery and reaching a full recovery, if not by the end of 2017, then early in 2018. And I'm looking forward to finishing out another semester at the university.
That's great. And we have at least a few more semesters with you in the university.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm assuming this list is probably long, but what are you reading right now?
Oh gosh. Okay, well, I'm in a class, so I'm reading plays by this woman named Afra Ben, who was I guess, the first professional female playwright in the Western canon in England. I'm reading a book called, oh gosh, The Power of Difference, which is about people who have disability, well, who have syndromes that are often considered disabilities, but those disabilities bring other strengths to them, such as autism, people who are on the autism spectrum. I'm very interested in doing some essays on my own about that issue, so I'm reading that book. And I'm reading a novel by Maeve Binchy.
That's your relaxation?
Well, and I also should say that I'm also reading a book of essays for my other class, right? Dr. Richard, I'm reading that other book.
Which bands or artists would you include in your all-time favorite playlist?
Oh, okay, which bands? Well, the Beatles, okay, Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, the old guys.
That's who I like.
The poets.
Okay, right. The lyricists.
That's right.
When you were young, what did you want to be when you grew up, as a child?
When I was a child, I wanted to be a war correspondent.
A war correspondent?
Yes, I did. I wanted to be Brenda Starr. I wanted to be a war correspondent. Yes.
What sparked that passion?
Well, I just, I would see the war correspondents. It was always so exciting. War was always going on. There was either the Korean War, and then after that, when I was a little bit older, there was the Vietnamese War, and there was always, kind of a dearth of information coming out until the Vietnamese War. So, and I've always been interested in writing, so that seemed and it seemed exciting. That was before I had a sense of my own mortality. But yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
All right, you ready for some silly questions? If you were a season, which one would you be and why?
Fall.
Why?
It's my favorite season. It's because things change color. Things change color to the colors that they change to. I like that. Where we live, it's really, I think, where we can tell a real demarcation in the seasons. In the spring, things kind of warm up all at once, right? It's either winter or summer. In the fall, you could kind of feel it getting crisper in the evening. You can see the changes in the light, and I like that. And it's also, kind of a real transition. If you looked at the fall of people, the autumn of people's lives, it's kind of like that's where wisdom is mostly accrued, and so I kind of equate that with the seasons as well.
That's a great answer to that question. If you could have dinner with anywhere between 1 and 5 famous figures from history or present day, who would they be?
Okay, well, first would be Margaret Sanger.
Okay, why?
Well, because I'm big on women's reproductive rights, right? And Margaret Sanger was the one who introduced birth control to women in the United States. She went to jail several times for her efforts. Then let's see, who else would it be? It would be Gloria Steinem. Okay. Then it would be Mark Twain, and for the conversation. And then it would be, who else would I have? Albert Einstein for the stimulation, and Richard Feynman.
Who's Richard
He's
Feynman?
a physicist. And John Irving, one of my favorite writers.
Yes.
The World According to Garp.
Yes.
The 110-Pound Marriage.
Yes. What is your superpower?
I think my superpower is the ability to get along with almost anyone.
Yes, that is a superpower, I believe.
Yeah, and I have yeah, and I really enjoy people who are on the oddness spectrum, that are sometimes a little bit, they find it harder to relate to people. I enjoy people like that, and I enjoy being able to relate to them.
What do you think it is that allows you to sort of break that barrier that maybe other people can't, and in getting to know the people on the odd spectrum?
Well, when I was studying cognitive science, right, we talked a lot about theory of mind and that ability to read other people, right, and read their emotions, which is what people on the autism spectrum often lack, some of that ability, right? And so it's very interesting to me that there are people who have all this fascinating insight, but they're not able to breach that barrier, right? And so I enjoy spending the time to breach that barrier with them, because it comes very easily to me. I mean, I have very low ego barriers in dealing with other people, right? So I guess I feel empathy for people who can't breach those barriers, those human barriers, as easily, and I enjoy being able to do so.
That's great. What could you or would you give advice to other people on how to breach those barriers, being that it comes so easily to you? Well,
it's not that it comes easily. It's it's one of those things that is challenging, but it's rewarding if you can do it. And I think you just have to you have to get out of yourself. You have to get out of your own ego and be patient, and don't get offended. People, sometimes people get offended if other people don't make eye contact. Things like that, right? The things that are conventional to us in terms of relating to other people, you have to just not take that personally when it doesn't happen, and understand that it's not about you. It's about this person's skills and what they're able to do, because they have other skills if you can get to them. They have other wonderful qualities.
That's great. All right, feel free to pass on this question, but what is one thing about you few people know?
I don't think that people know, well, I don't know, I could be entirely wrong about this, but I don't think that people know that I'm as silly as I am. My family knows how silly I am. My friends tend to think that I have not a bad sense of humor, but that I'm pretty serious, right? But I'm pretty serious. I'm pretty silly. At core.
And what do you mean by that? How do you mean?
I'm just very silly. I mean, everything strikes me as funny, and I just I'm the one in the theater who laughs before the punchline, and
So you think maybe your reputation as an educational institution,
a nerd,
a nerd, or maybe even an activist too. I think
yes,
activists
exactly.
A lot of times get
that's right.
Real serious reputations. Well, that's good.
And I'm probably entirely wrong about this, and people will call me up and go, "No, you're wrong. We know just how silly you are."
What achievement are you most proud of?
My daughter. Having my daughter. I had my daughter, my ex-husband and I had our daughter when we were a little bit older. I was almost 38 and he was 40, and we had tried to have a child for a few years. It wasn't happening, and then we finally had our daughter, and she is just a phenomenal human being. She's difficult like we are, and complicated like we are, and she's just I'm enjoying watching her blossom into a beautiful young woman, resourceful young woman.
That's sweet. Had you always known that you wanted to be a mother?
No. When I was very young, I didn't think I didn't want to be a mother, and then I went through it's a little bit like the the 7 stages of grief or something. The next phase I went through was, I'm much too self-absorbed. I wouldn't have the patience. Baby wouldn't stop crying. I'd bang her against the wall, that kind of thing, right? My mother kept saying, "Oh no, not if it's your child." I said, yeah, I think so. And then finally, in my 30s, it kind of hit me that, I think I'd like to have a child.
Well, she sounds
I think
lucky.
it sounded like a challenge, right? You know, it sounded like a challenge, and you know, I'm always up for a challenge.
Would you say that challenges are something that really inspire you?
Oh, definitely. You know, I'm not. There are some people who are risk takers. I don't think that I'm a risk taker. In fact, I'm kind of a scaredy cat. But I'm a challenge seeker. You know, I like to challenge myself.
And we're all lucky for it, I think. How would you like to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as being a kind and compassionate person and a loyal person.
Well, that is lovely. All right, this is the last question, I think, if you're ready for it. Yes. Can you describe yourself in 3 words?
Tenacious, loyal, and curious.
Sounds like you hit it on the head there. Sally, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
I think you kind of asked some very good questions.
We went all around the board there.
We did.
All right. Thank you so much for taking some time to come talk to us.
You're very welcome,
Sally.
Matt. I enjoyed it. You made it painless.